He abandoned my daughter when she told him she was pregnant. 10 years later, he's standing at her funeral in a suit that costs more than my truck, telling me he's entitled to the $29 million she left me. He's smiling while he says it. That same practiced smile I remember from a decade ago, the one that makes everything sound reasonable even when it's poison. Then he finally notices who's standing behind me, and his smile vanishes instantly, as if someone had switched off a light. Before we continue, we ask you to hit the hype button, subscribe, and like the video to help the channel grow. Tell us which city you are from in the comments. We would like to get to know our audience better, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back 10 years, to when I didn't know Eric Dalton existed, to when I thought my daughter Frances was just building a business, not walking into a trap. Frances was 33 then, working the overnight shift in the private recovery wing at Mercy General. That's the floor where wealthy patients go after surgery when they want privacy more than they want their insurance to cover things. Politicians getting knee replacements, executives getting bypasses, actors getting work done on their faces, people who couldn't afford to look weak, even for a day. Frances saw something there that nobody else did. She came to my house one Sunday with folders full of notes and spreadsheets, laid them out on my kitchen table like battle plans. "Rich people don't want to go home after surgery," she said, tapping one of the spreadsheets. "They don't want their families hovering. They don't want neighbors seeing the ambulance. They don't want some cousin's sick kid giving them an infection. What they want is a place that's not a hospital, but has hospital-level care. Privacy as a product." I looked at her numbers. The projected costs made my eyes water. That's expensive. Dad, that's the point. We're not selling healthcare. We're selling invisibility, discretion, the ability to have major surgery and come back to work looking like you just had a long weekend. "We?" She smiled. That fierce, sharp smile that meant she'd already made up her mind and was just letting me catch up. "I'm calling it Aurum Recovery, gold standard post-surgical care. I've already found a property, that old Victorian on East Miller Street. 5 bedrooms, good bones, quiet neighborhood. I can retrofit it with medical equipment, hire nurses, create private suites. Frances, the startup costs alone. I've got investors interested, real ones, people who understand the market." She paused. "One of them wants to meet you, actually. His name's Eric Dalton." That's how I first heard his name, like it was supposed to mean something. Eric showed up at Frances's apartment for dinner 2 weeks later. I was there because Frances had asked me to meet him, to give her my read on whether he was serious or just another smooth talker. The moment he walked in, I knew which one he was. He wore a suit that probably cost $2,000, carried a bottle of wine that cost more than that, and shook my hand like we were signing a contract. His grip was firm but not genuine. Calculated. Everything about him was calculated. "Mr. Lawson, Frances has told me so much about you," he said, flashing that smile. White teeth, practiced warmth. 30 years at the factory, right? That's real work. That's the backbone of this country. He said it like he was running for office, like real work was a phrase he'd learned to deploy at the right moments. Frances was setting the table, her back to us, but I saw her shoulders tense. She heard it too, that slight condescension wrapped in compliment. "Eric works in medical supply sales," she said, changing the subject. "He has connections with half the private practices in the region." "Sales is about relationships," Eric said, settling into a chair like he owned it. "You build trust, you create value, you position yourself as the solution people need before they know they need it. Frances has vision. She sees a gap in the market that's worth millions. I can help her fill it." The way he said "I can help her" made it sound like Frances was the one who needed him, not the other way around. We ate dinner. Eric talked about market positioning and high-net-worth clientele and strategic partnerships. He talked about Frances like she was a startup he was considering funding. "She's brilliant," he'd say, then pivot to explaining what she needed to do to succeed, as if her brilliance required his direction to matter. Frances listened, asked questions, took notes. She was always taking notes, building something in her head. I didn't like him. But Frances was smart, tougher than most people realized, and she didn't need me to vet her relationships. So I kept my mouth shut and hoped I was wrong about the cold calculation I saw behind his eyes. I met him one more time after that, at a work event for Frances's hospital. Eric stood beside her, hand on her lower back, introducing her to doctors and administrators like she was his discovery. "This is Frances Lawson," he'd say. "Brilliant mind. She's going to revolutionize post-surgical care." Then he'd pivot to talking about himself, about his work in medical supplies, about the synergies between what he did and what Frances was building. I watched Frances's face. She was smiling, playing along, but her eyes were distant, like she was doing math in her head that didn't quite add up. 6 months later, Aurum Recovery was moving from concept to reality. Frances had found investors, secured the Victorian property, started the retrofit process. Eric was around constantly, offering advice, making introductions, positioning himself as a partner even though he hadn't put in any money or signed any formal agreements. That's when Frances got pregnant. She called me at 2 a.m. I was asleep, and the phone ringing at that hour made my heart stop. You never get good news at 2 a.m. when you're 63 and your daughter lives alone. "Dad, I need to see you." "What happened? Are you hurt?" "I'm fine. I'm pregnant. I told Eric tonight." Silence. I sat up in bed, wide awake now. "What did he say?" Her voice was steady but thin, like she was holding herself together with wire. "He asked me how much it was going to cost him." "Frances, not, are you okay? Not, what do we do? Just how much? Like I was billing him for a service." "Where are you?" "My apartment. He's gone. He packed his stuff and left. Said he needed to think." "I'm coming over." "Dad, it's 2 a.m. I'm coming over." I drove to her apartment in my truck, breaking every speed limit. She buzzed me in. I found her sitting on her couch in the dark, still in her work scrubs, staring at nothing. I sat beside her. Didn't say anything. Just sat. After a long time, she spoke. "He called the baby a complication. He said he needed to reassess his investment in our relationship." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Investment? Like I'm a stock portfolio." "Did he say he's coming back?" "He said he'd call, but he won't. I know he won't." She was right. The next morning, Eric's phone was disconnected. By noon, his apartment was emptied. The landlord confirmed it. His company reported that he had resigned 2 weeks earlier. He left no forwarding address, no note, no explanation. He just erased himself. Efficiently. Completely. Like Frances had been a project he'd decided to abandon. I found Frances 3 days later in the hospital parking structure after her shift. She was sitting in her car with the engine off, both hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. I knocked on the window. She didn't move. I opened the door and got into the passenger seat. We sat there for 20 minutes in silence. Finally, Frances turned to look at me. Her eyes were dry but fierce, burning with something harder than grief. "He's not going to claim this child when it's convenient. Promise me." "I promise." "I mean it, Dad. 10 years from now, he doesn't get to walk back in and say, 'My son.' You hear me? If something happens to me, if I'm not here, you don't let him near this baby, ever. No matter what he says, no matter what anyone says. This child is mine and yours, not his. Frances, nothing's going to happen to you. Promise me." I looked at my daughter. At the woman who'd just been abandoned by a man who'd pretended to love her, who was pregnant and terrified and absolutely refusing to break. "I promise," I said. She nodded once. Then she started the car and drove home, and I followed her in my truck to make sure she got there safe. That was the last time I saw her cry. After that night, Frances locked it down. She went back to work. She kept building Aurum Recovery. She never mentioned Eric's name again except in legal documents where she had to list him as biological father. No contact, no support. She was 33, pregnant, and alone. And she refused to be destroyed by it. Liam was born on a Tuesday in March, 3 weeks early. Frances's water broke while she was showing potential investors through the Victorian property she'd just finished retrofitting into Aurum Recovery's first location. She called me from the hospital, her voice tight with pain and something that might have been excitement. "Dad, I'm in labor. Can you come?" I was there in 15 minutes, broke every traffic law getting there. The delivery took 14 hours, long enough that I saw sunrise twice through the hospital windows. Frances was exhausted, wired on epidural and adrenaline, gripping my hand so hard during contractions that I thought she might break bones. Eric wasn't there. Of course he wasn't. He was somewhere else, living a different life, pretending she'd never existed. When Liam finally came, small and screaming and alive, the nurse cleaned him up and put him in Frances's arms. She looked down at him with an expression I'd never seen before. Terror and love and determination all mixed together. "Dad," she said, not looking up from the baby. "You're his grandfather. That's real. That matters. Whatever happens, he has you." I couldn't speak. I just nodded. The nurses left us alone after a while. Frances was falling asleep, Liam tucked against her chest. Before her eyes closed completely, she said one more thing. "Don't let Eric near him. Ever. I won't. Even if I'm not here, even if something happens to me. Frances, promise again." "I promise." She fell asleep then, holding her son, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. Eric didn't send anything. No card, no flowers, not even a message asking if the mother and baby were all right. Nothing. He had disappeared so completely that, for a time, I almost believed he might have passed away, that something terrible had happened to him, and that explained his absence. But he was alive. He had simply moved on. A clean break, without a trace of responsibility. Frances went back to work 6 weeks after giving birth. Not because she wanted to, but because Aurum Recovery was still in its fragile startup phase. She'd hired a nanny, a stern older woman named Mrs. Chen, who'd raised 4 kids of her own. I watched Liam on weekends, learning to change diapers and mix formula and calm a screaming infant at 2 a.m. I was 63 years old, retired from the factory, and suddenly I was more involved in raising a baby than I'd been since Frances herself was born 33 years earlier. Liam was a quiet baby, observant. He'd watch you with these dark, serious eyes that looked too old for his face. Frances said he had my wife's eyes. Her sister Giselle said the same thing. Looking at him was like looking at my late wife as an infant, if such a thing were possible. Frances poured everything into Aurum Recovery. I watched her transform that Victorian house into something that looked like a luxury hotel crossed with a hospital. She hired 3 nurses initially, all experienced, all willing to work weird hours for good pay. She brought in a part-time physician, a retired surgeon named Dr. Castellanos, who was bored with golf and missed feeling useful. Her first client was a state senator who needed rotator cuff surgery and couldn't afford the optics of looking injured or weak. He paid $20,000 for 2 weeks of private recovery where he could heal without anyone knowing he'd been hurt. Word spread like wildfire through the right circles. By the end of year 1, Aurum Recovery had 12 clients. By year 2, Frances had a waiting list and was looking at opening a second location. I watched her work herself to exhaustion. 70-hour weeks. 80-hour weeks. She'd fall asleep in her office chair and wake up at dawn to start checking on patients. She attended every intake consultation, reviewed every discharge plan, personally followed up with clients weeks after they'd left. Liam grew up with his mother always working, always building, always pushing. I tried to fill the gaps. I took him to the park. I taught him to ride a bike. I was there for his first day of kindergarten when Francis was stuck in a negotiation with investors. I was the one who read him bedtime stories and made him breakfast and showed up at parent-teacher conferences. Eric sent nothing. No child support, no birthday card, no acknowledgement that his son existed. Liam didn't ask about his father because he didn't know there was supposed to be one. When other kids at school talked about their dads, Liam just said, "I have my papa," and meant me. That should have made me happy. But every time he said it, I thought about Eric Dalton walking away clean, living somewhere without consequences, while Frances destroyed her health building something from nothing. By the time Liam was 5, Frances had 2 Aurum Recovery locations and was being profiled in business magazines. The woman revolutionizing post-surgical care, privacy as luxury, the rise of elite recovery services. Investors were circling, asking if she'd ever consider selling. "Not yet," she'd tell them. "I need to build it right first." By the time Liam was 7, Frances was always tired. Her job kept her on her feet for long hours during hospital rounds. She took medicine to manage her health and needed help to sleep. I watched her age too soon, giving up her well-being and time in exchange for success. By the time Liam was 10, a national rehabilitation network made her an offer she couldn't refuse. $52 million for full acquisition of Aurum Recovery. After legal fees, taxes, and paying out her early investors, Frances cleared $29 million. $29 million, built from an idea she'd had in a hospital hallway while pregnant and abandoned. We went to dinner to celebrate, just the 3 of us. Frances ordered expensive wine and barely touched it. She looked exhausted. Triumphant, but exhausted. "I did it," she said, more to herself than to us. "I actually did it." Liam was eating pasta, not understanding the significance of the number. I raised my glass. "Your mother just became one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the state," I told him. "Remember this." He smiled. "That's cool, Mom." Frances laughed, the first real laugh I'd heard from her in months. Then she turned serious. "I'm writing a new will," she said. "I'm leaving everything to you, Dad, not to Liam." I started to protest, but she cut me off. "If I leave it to Liam, Eric will try to claim it as his father. You know he will. The moment he finds out there's money, he'll appear. But if I leave it to you, it's clean. You manage it for Liam. Eric gets nothing. Frances, promise me again, for the last time, you don't let him near this money. You don't let him near Liam." Liam was watching us, confused. Frances smiled at him, that fierce, protective smile. "Papa's going to take care of you," she said. "No matter what happens to me, Papa's got you. Okay?" "Okay, Mom," I promised again. I meant it again. 3 months later, Frances collapsed in her kitchen while making coffee. Cerebral hemorrhage. Massive. The doctors said it was probably years of untreated hypertension, stress, exhaustion. Her body had been sending warning signals for a long time, and she'd ignored them all because she was too busy building something that mattered. She passed away 3 days later without regaining consciousness. The machines kept her alive until we signed the papers to release her peacefully. She was 43 years old, Liam was 10, and I was alone with a grandson and a promise I intended to keep, no matter what it cost. The funeral arrangements took 4 days to finalize. I moved through them in a fog, making decisions that felt both crucial and meaningless. Casket selection, flower arrangements, which psalms to read, even though Frances hadn't been religious. I kept thinking she'd call and tell me I was doing it wrong, that she'd take over because she was better at organizing things than I was. But she didn't call. She was gone. Liam cried only once, the night she passed away. I heard him through his bedroom door trying to hide his sobs in his pillow. I went in and sat beside him, and he curled up against me like he used to when he was little. We stayed that way until he finally drifted off to sleep. After that, he went quiet. Not depressed exactly, but still. like he was processing something too big to fit into words. Francis's lawyer, a sharp woman named Keegan with silver-streaked hair and a handshake like a vice, walked me through the will at her downtown office. The paperwork was immaculate, exactly like Francis had described it. $29 million held in trust under my name, with explicit instructions for Liam's care, education, and future. There were detailed provisions for everything: annual educational expenses, healthcare, housing, emergency contingencies. And there was a clause about Eric. Under no circumstances, Keegan read aloud, is Eric Dalton to receive any portion of this estate, directly or indirectly, regardless of his biological relation to my son. He abandoned us before Liam's birth and has provided zero support, financial or emotional, in the 10 years since. This is my final statement on his claim to any relationship with my child or my assets. Keegan looked up. She was thorough. She knew him, I said. Has he reached out at all since she passed away? Not in 10 years. Why would he start now? Keegan gave me a look that was half sympathy, half warning. Mr. Lawson, there's $29 million at stake. Men have appeared from deeper graves for less. If Eric finds out about the money, he'll come, and he'll claim parental rights. He has no rights, he abandoned them. Legally, you're correct, but he can make noise. He can file petitions. He can claim he wants a relationship with his son and that the money should be held in trust for Liam's benefit with him as co-trustee. It's garbage, but it's loud garbage that takes time and money to fight. Then we'll fight. I hope we don't have to, Keegan said. But prepare yourself. Francis did everything right, but the word father carries weight in court, even when the father doesn't deserve it. The funeral was set for Saturday afternoon. I'd kept it small, immediate family only, which meant basically me, Liam, and Giselle. Francis didn't have many close friends. She'd spent the last 10 years working too hard to maintain relationships. I told Liam he didn't have to go if he didn't want to. He looked at me like I was insane. She's my mom, he said simply. Of course I'm going. So we went. Giselle drove up from Indianapolis. She was 59, my late wife's younger sister. With gray hair she wore short and no patience for nonsense. She'd been a journalist for 30 years, mostly investigative work and human interest features. She knew how to find truth and how to make it hurt when necessary. She hugged me at the funeral home, held on longer than usual. I'm so sorry, Henry. Francis was remarkable. She pushed herself beyond her limits. She built something that mattered. That's more than most people do. Liam stood between us, uncomfortable in his suit, looking small and lost. Giselle bent down to his level. You look just like your mom around the eyes, she told him. That's a good thing. She had the best eyes. He tried to smile. It didn't quite work. The service was quiet, brief, painful. 20 people showed up. Some of Francis's nurses from Aurum Recovery. A few former clients who genuinely cared about her. Dr. Castellanos, who cried during the eulogy. Giselle read a poem. I couldn't speak without breaking, so I didn't try. We were standing by the casket afterward, just the three of us, when I heard a voice I hadn't heard in a decade. Henry, I'm so sorry for your loss. I turned. Eric Dalton stood 10 feet away, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my mortgage payment. His hair was grayer at the temples, styled deliberately. He looked successful, polished, like the last 10 years had been very good to him. Behind him stood a woman I vaguely recognized, Nora something, a former local TV anchor who'd married rich and retired from the news. She was blonde, beautiful in a calculated way, wearing black like it was a fashion choice rather than a funeral requirement. Eric saw me staring and walked closer, hand extended. I didn't shake it. I came as soon as I heard, Eric said, withdrawing his hand smoothly. She was special. I had to pay my respects. I couldn't speak. My throat had closed. Giselle stepped slightly forward, putting herself between Eric and Liam. Eric glanced at the casket, at Francis's photo, then back at me. I know we lost touch. I know I made mistakes. But Francis and we had something real once. I wanted to be here. You weren't here, I finally managed, for 10 years. I know, and I regret that. More than you know. He looked past me at Liam, who was standing silent and confused. Eric's face changed. Recognition, maybe, or calculation. Is that Liam? I moved to block his view. Don't. He's gotten so big. He looks like... Eric trailed off, but I knew what he was thinking. He looks like me. You need to leave, I said. Henry, I understand you're grieving. So am I. But we need to talk. About Liam. About his future. About what Francis left behind. There it was. Faster than I'd expected. Not even pretending to wait a respectful amount of time. There's nothing to discuss, I said. Eric's expression shifted, the sympathy sliding away to reveal something harder underneath. Francis built Aurum Recovery during the years we were together. I was part of that foundation, whether you want to acknowledge it or not. And Liam is my son. Biologically, legally, that matters. You left before he was born. I made mistakes. I was young, scared. But that doesn't erase biology. I have rights. You have nothing. Eric smiled then, that practiced smile that made him look reasonable even when he was being a predator. We'll see what a judge says, but I'd prefer we handle this privately, for Liam's sake. I don't want this to get ugly. Then leave. I'll give you time to grieve, Eric said, backing away slightly. Nora touched his arm, ready to go. But we will talk, soon, about Liam's future, about what's fair. He left. Nora followed, pausing to give me a look that might have been pity or might have been something worse. Liam tugged my sleeve. Who was that? I looked down at my grandson, at the boy Eric had thrown away like garbage, who was now valuable because there was money involved. Nobody, I said. But we both knew I was lying. Giselle pulled me aside while Liam was talking to Dr. Castellanos. That was Eric Dalton, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. He came for the money. Yes. How much does he know? Enough. The sale was public. He's been following Francis's success. Giselle's jaw tightened. That awful man. He left her when she needed him most, and now he appears the moment she's gone to take what she worked for. He threatened to sue. Parental rights, claims to the estate. Can he win? Keegan says no, but he can make it public and expensive. Giselle looked at me, her journalist's mind already working. What do you want to do? I thought about Francis, about her promise, about the look on Eric's face when he'd said, "We'll see what a judge says," like this was negotiable, like he had leverage. I want to destroy him, I said quietly. Giselle didn't look surprised. How? I don't know yet, but I will. She nodded slowly. Then let's start figuring it out. Eric's lawyer sent the letter 3 days after the funeral. It arrived certified mail, thick and official, the kind of envelope that means someone's about to ruin your life legally. I opened it at my kitchen table. Liam was at school. The house was quiet, except for the sound of paper unfolding. The letter was 12 pages long, written in the careful language lawyers use when they're threatening you, but want plausible deniability. Phrases like biological parental rights and equitable distribution of assets and the child's best interests appeared over and over, like legal incantations. What it meant in plain English, Eric wanted money, and he was willing to weaponize Liam to get it. The letter claimed Eric had been estranged due to circumstances beyond his control, a lie so brazen it took my breath away. It stated he now wished to re-establish a meaningful relationship with his biological son and to ensure proper financial provision for the child's future welfare. It demanded a meeting within 14 days to discuss settlement terms. If I refused, they'd file a petition in family court seeking shared custody, co-trusteeship of Liam's inheritance, and retroactive child support payments that Francis had supposedly withheld. The retroactive support claim was particularly disgusting. Eric had never paid a cent in 10 years, had never even contacted Frances to arrange support. But now he was claiming she'd refused his attempts to provide for his son. I read it twice. Then I called Keegan. She answered on the second ring. You got the letter. You knew it was coming? His lawyer called me yesterday to give a so-called courtesy warning. I told him to back off, politely, in professional terms. What are my options? Honestly, 3 paths. First option, settle. Give him something to go away. A few million, call it Liam's college fund, get him to sign away all parental rights permanently. Clean, fast, expensive. No. I thought you'd say that. Second option, we fight him in court. We prove he abandoned Frances and Liam, that he has no documented relationship with the child, that Frances explicitly excluded him from her estate for cause. We'll win eventually, but it takes time. Months, maybe a year, and it gets public, messy, reporters, photographers outside the courthouse, Liam's face in the paper. What's the third option? Keegan was quiet for a moment. There isn't one. Those are your choices. Pay him off or fight him legally. What if I want him destroyed? Henry, what if I want him so thoroughly destroyed that he never tries this again? That he can't try this again because nobody will ever take him seriously? I'm a lawyer. I can't advise that. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking if it's possible. Another pause. Technically, if someone were to, say, publicly expose his character in a way that didn't violate any laws, if someone were to gather documented evidence of his abandonment and present it in a forum where it would damage his credibility beyond repair, that might work. But it would have to be perfect. Legal, public, devastating. And you'd need help. I know someone who can help. Then God help Eric Dalton, Keegan said, because I think he's going to need it. I called Giselle that night after Liam went to bed. I need your help, I said. I figured. What do you need? Everything. I need to know everywhere Eric's been for the last 10 years. Everyone he's talked to about Frances. Everyone who knows what he really said about her, about the baby. I need proof, real proof. Not just that he left. Everyone knows that. I need proof of who he is, what he said, his own words. You want to bury him. I want him to bury himself. Giselle was quiet for a long moment. I could hear her thinking, the way my late wife used to think, methodical and thorough. This is going to take time, she finally said. Weeks, maybe months. I'll need to track down his old co-workers, friends, anyone who was around when he left Frances. I'll need to find people willing to talk, willing to go on record. Whatever it takes. Henry, there's no guarantee we'll find anything usable. People forget. They move on. They don't want to get involved. Try anyway. Okay. But if we're doing this, we're doing it right. No half measures. We find everything, we document everything, and when we move, we make sure he doesn't get back up. Agreed. One more thing, Giselle said. If we do this, if we actually pull this off, you have to be ready for what comes after. Because Eric won't be the only one who gets hurt. This will be public, ugly. Liam will find out things about his father that might be hard to hear. Liam deserves the truth. Does he deserve it at 10 years old? I thought about that. About Liam growing up thinking his father simply wasn't interested, versus knowing his father had actively called him a problem and not worth the investment. He deserves protection, I said. From Eric. From anyone who'd use him for money. If the truth is the price, then yes, he deserves that too. All right, Giselle said. Then let's get to work. Giselle started the next morning. She'd kept what she called her blue notebook from her journalism days, a worn leather journal full of contacts, sources, people who owed her favors or who she'd helped over the years. She started making calls. The first week turned up nothing. Eric's old friends had either moved away or didn't want to talk. His former co-workers were wary. Eric had connections in medical supply sales, and nobody wanted to burn bridges in a small industry. But Giselle was patient. She'd been a journalist for 30 years. She knew how to wait, how to ask the right questions, how to make people comfortable enough to tell the truth. Week 2, she found Beth Moreland. Beth had worked in the same regional office as Eric back when he was dating Frances. She'd left the company years ago, moved to Chicago, started her own medical consulting firm. She had nothing to lose by talking. They met at a coffee shop near Beth's office. Giselle recorded the conversation on her phone, with permission. Eric was charming, Beth said, stirring sugar into her coffee. Everyone liked him at first. He was good at his job, made the numbers, said the right things. But once you knew him for a while, you started seeing the calculation behind everything. He didn't have friends. He had assets. Did he talk about Frances? All the time. He called her his investment opportunity. I thought he was joking at first, but he wasn't. He literally said she was going to make him rich someday, that he was positioning himself early. What happened when she got pregnant? Beth's face hardened. He panicked, not because he cared about being a father, because it complicated his exit strategy. He'd been planning to leave her anyway once Aurum Recovery started taking off. He wanted to be around long enough to have claim to the company's success, but not long enough to actually commit. The pregnancy sped up his timeline. Did he say that explicitly? He said a lot of things. We went to happy hour the week before he left. He was drunk, stressed. He told me, and I remember this exactly, if she goes down, I'll just come back and take my half. I spent time on her. The kid is her problem. I'm not doing diapers and drama. Giselle leaned forward. You're sure those were his exact words? Absolutely. I remember because I told him he was being awful. We didn't talk much after that. Would you be willing to put that in writing? A sworn statement? Beth hesitated. Eric has money now, connections. If I go on record, he's intimidating a 10-year-old boy and trying to take from a woman's estate after she's gone, Giselle said softly. Frances Lawson was intelligent and compassionate. She built something remarkable while raising her son on her own. Now Eric wants to claim her achievements and benefit from her passing. Do you want to help stop him? Beth stared at her coffee for a long moment, then nodded. Yes. I'll write it down. I'll sign it. Forget him. Giselle called me that night. I've got one statement, a good one. But we need more. Keep looking. She did. Week 3, she found Thomas Ridge, Eric's old roommate from before he met Frances. Thomas still lived in town, worked construction, had no love for Eric. He was always like that, Thomas told Giselle over beers at a dive bar. Users use, you know? Eric used to say he was building his network, but what he meant was finding people who could give him something. When they stopped being useful, he'd ghost them. I watched him do it to 3 different girlfriends before Frances. What happened with Frances? She was different, smarter, more ambitious. He thought she was his ticket to something bigger. Then she got pregnant and it wasn't convenient anymore, so he bailed. Simple as that. Did he ever say anything specific about her? About the baby? Thomas frowned, thinking. Yeah, he told me, maybe 2 days before he left, and he said, I'm letting go of anything that might drag me down. When I asked what he meant, he said, Frances and her mistake. That's what he called his own child. Her mistake. Would you testify to that? Hell yes. Giselle collected 3 more statements over the next 2 weeks. A bartender who'd overheard Eric bragging about dodging a bullet. A mutual friend who testified Eric had explicitly said he had 0 interest in playing house. A former colleague who remembered Eric joking about franchise babies, kids other men raised while he moved on to better opportunities. But Giselle wanted more than statements. She wanted audio. She wanted Eric's own voice condemning him. She tracked down Phil Granger through a series of LinkedIn connections. Phil had been Eric's best friend back then, the guy he'd confided in. He'd moved to Oregon, gotten married, had 3 kids. He was a different person now, but he remembered Eric clearly. I've been waiting for this call for 10 years, Phil told Giselle on the phone. Why? Because I knew Eric would try something eventually. The moment I heard Francis's company sold for millions, I knew he'd crawl out of whatever hole he'd been hiding in. You sound like you were expecting this. Eric's predictable. He only shows up when there's something to take, and he always thinks he's entitled to it. Did you keep in touch with him? No. We stopped talking after he left Francis. I told him he was making a mistake. He told me I didn't understand business. That was the last conversation we had. Do you have any documentation from that time? Texts? Emails? Anything? Phil was quiet for a long moment. I have something better. A voice recording. Giselle sat up straighter. Of Eric? Yeah. We were working on a sales presentation together, and I was recording us talking through ideas. He got drunk halfway through and started venting about Francis, about the pregnancy, about his plan to leave. I kept recording because, I don't know, insurance? Proof that I told him he was being a monster? I've had it in my garage for 10 years, on an old digital recorder. Can you send it to me? Let me find it first. Give me a few days. 3 days later, Giselle called me at midnight. Listen to this, she said. I heard a click, then Eric's voice. Younger than I remembered, looser, drunk, but unmistakably him. Francis is smart, I'll give her that. Driven. She'll make that recovery center work if anyone can. But she's a trap now, man. Pregnant? Jesus. That's not what I signed up for. I'm not doing diapers and drama. I'm not paying for some kid to call me daddy for 18 years while she gets fat and boring and I'm stuck. I spent time on her, built her up. If she goes down, fine. I'll come back later and take my half. The business, the connections, whatever she builds, I was part of that foundation. But the kid? That's her problem. I'm out. The recording ended. Silence. That's him, I said. That's him in his own words, on tape, saying everything we need. Phil signed an affidavit swearing this is authentic, that it was recorded 10 years ago, that he's willing to testify to its authenticity in court. What do we do with it? We use it exactly once, in exactly the right place, in front of exactly the right people, and we make sure Eric never recovers. When? The memorial service, Giselle said. The public one you're planning. That's where we do it. I'd been planning a larger memorial for Francis in 2 weeks. Something more public than the funeral. Something befitting the woman who'd built Aurum Recovery. I'd invited her staff, her investors, the surgeons and nurses who'd worked with her, hospital board members, even a few local press contacts. Eric had already sent word through his lawyer that he'd be attending. He wanted to be seen as family, as someone who deserved a say in Liam's future. You want to ambush him in public, I said. I want to let him destroy himself in public, Giselle corrected. We'll play a tribute video, photos of Francis, testimonials from people who knew her work. And right at the end, we play this, his own voice, in front of everyone who matters. That's brutal. That's what he deserves. I thought about it. About Francis driving herself to exhaustion while Eric enjoyed an easy, comfortable life. About Liam growing up without a father because Eric had decided he was not worth the investment. About Eric showing up now, at Francis's funeral, to claim what he'd never earned. Do it, I said. Set it up. Eric made his official move exactly 14 days after the funeral, right on his lawyer's timeline. He filed a petition in family court claiming biological parental rights and requesting a formal review of Liam's custody arrangement and financial management. The filing hit the local news within hours. Keegan called me that afternoon. It's public, she said. Eric's lawyer leaked it. To who? Everyone. The Gazette published it as a human interest piece. Estranged father seeks role in son's life after mother's tragic passing. The TV stations picked it up too, and now it's on 3 local news websites. What are they saying? Exactly what Eric wants them to say. That he's a flawed but hopeful man trying to reconnect with his son after years of regret. That he wants to be part of Liam's life. The money gets mentioned almost as an afterthought, like it's incidental to a father's love. That's nonsense. Of course it is, but it's calculated nonsense. Eric's shaping the story to make himself look sympathetic before we have the chance to share the truth. What about Frances? Are they mentioning what he did to her? In passing, and only to say they lost touch during the pregnancy. No mention of abandonment, no mention of him disappearing without support. Just lost touch, like it was mutual. I felt my jaw clench. So he's rewriting history. In real time, and his wife Nora gave a quote that's making rounds. Want to hear it? No, tell me anyway. Keegan read from her phone. Eric has made mistakes, but he's a good man who wants to be part of Liam's life. It's heartbreaking that grief has made some people forget what's best for the child. That some people is you, by the way. The implication was clear. I was the bitter old man standing in the way of a father reuniting with his son. I was the obstacle. I was the villain in Eric's carefully constructed story. Can we respond? We could. But if we respond now, it becomes a back and forth. He said, she said. Better to wait, let him overextend, than hit him with everything at once. The memorial's in 5 days. I know. Can you wait that long? I thought about Liam, who'd started asking why strangers were talking about him at school, about Eric's face on the news, looking sympathetic and wronged, about the way he was weaponizing public opinion before we'd even had a chance to fight back. I'll wait, I said. But when we move, I want it to be final. It will be. Giselle's been sending me the statements she's collected. They're devastating, Henry. Absolutely devastating. If we present them right, Eric won't recover. Good. That night, Liam asked me about the news stories. We were eating dinner, spaghetti and meatballs, his favorite. He'd been quiet all evening, pushing food around his plate. Papa, he said finally, some kids at school said there's a man on TV who says he's my dad. I put down my fork. What did you say? I said I don't have a dad. I have you. That's right. But the kid said he's real, that he's trying to see me. Is that true? I looked at my grandson. 10 years old, too young to understand the full ugliness of what was happening, but old enough to feel the weight of it. There's someone, I said gently. His name is Eric. He's your biological father, meaning you're connected by DNA. But he left before you were born and has never been part of your life. The reason he wants to see you now isn't out of care or affection. It's because your mom left behind some money and he wants a share of it. Liam processed that. That's mean. Yes, it is. Are you going to let him? No. Good. Liam went back to eating. The matter settled in his mind with the simple certainty of childhood. If Papa said no, then the answer was no. I wished it were that simple. The next 3 days crawled by. Eric's face was everywhere, on news sites, on local TV, in the newspaper. He gave interviews where he talked about the memorial service was set for Saturday at 3 p.m. I'd rented the larger chapel at Morrison Funeral Home, the one with the projector screen and seating for 200. By 2:30, every seat was full. Frances's former staff came, all 12 nurses from Aurum Recovery, wearing black dresses and holding tissues. Dr. Castellanos sat in the front row with 3 other surgeons who'd referred patients to Frances over the years. The investors who'd bought Aurum Recovery sent representatives. Hospital board members showed up because Frances had mattered in their world. She'd solved problems they'd been struggling with for years. And the press came. 2 TV cameras in the back, 4 reporters with notepads, a photographer from the Gazette. Tom Vega arrived at 2:45. He wore a dark suit that made him look like a retired bodyguard, which basically he was. He nodded at me and took a position near the front, off to the side where he could see everything. Giselle was operating the projector from a small booth in the back. She'd spent 3 days editing the tribute video, making it seamless, making sure the transition to Eric's audio would sound natural until it was too late for anyone to stop it. Eric arrived at 2:50 with Nora beside him. He wore a navy suit, perfectly tailored, a burgundy tie. Nora wore black pearls and the expression of someone performing grief for cameras. They moved through the room, shaking hands, accepting condolences, playing the role of bereaved family. Eric saw me and walked over. Tom shifted slightly, placing himself between us. "Henry," Eric said, his voice pitched for the people around us to hear. "This is beautiful. Francis would have loved this." I said nothing. "I hope we can talk afterward," Eric continued. "About Liam, about moving forward as a family." "You're not family," I said quietly. Eric's smile tightened. "I'm his father. That makes me family by definition. Biology isn't family. Showing up is family. You never did. That's the past. I'm here now. You're here for money." Eric glanced around, making sure people were listening. "I'm here for my son. The money is for his benefit, not mine. A child deserves support from both parents." "Both parents," I repeated. "Where were you 10 years ago when he needed diapers? 5 years ago when he had pneumonia? Last year at his school play?" "I made mistakes." "You made a choice. You walked away. Now you want back in because there's a payday." People were watching now. Good. Let them watch. The service started at 3. I stood at the front near Francis's photo and spoke briefly about my daughter, about her vision, her work ethic, her refusal to quit when everyone said Aurum Recovery was too expensive, too niche, too risky. "She proved everyone wrong," I said. "She built something that mattered, and she did it alone." That last word hung in the air. Eric's face tightened. I nodded to Giselle. The lights dimmed. The screen lit up. The tribute video began with photos of Francis at Aurum Recovery, working late, checking patient monitors, reviewing discharge papers at 3 in the morning with exhaustion written on her face. Testimonials played over the images. Francis never left until every patient was stable. She worked herself to the bone for people she barely knew. She gave everything to make people feel safe when they were vulnerable. The photos shifted to Francis's success, the ribbon cutting, the sale agreement signing, her exhausted smile at the celebration dinner. Then the screen faded to black. For a moment, silence. Then Eric's voice filled the room, younger, drunk, unmistakable. "Francis is smart, I'll give her that. But she's a trap now. Pregnant? Jesus, I'm not doing diapers and drama. I spent time on her. If she goes down, I'll come back later and take my half. The kid is her problem. I'm out." The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop through concrete. Every head in the room turned toward Eric, slowly, deliberately. Cameras swung to capture his face. He'd gone white, frozen. Beside him, Nora looked like she'd been slapped. I stepped forward. That was recorded 10 years ago. 1 week before Eric Dalton disappeared from my daughter's life. 1 week before she gave birth alone. Eric stood abruptly. "That's out of context." "What context?" I said, my voice carrying through the chapel. "Makes calling your child her problem acceptable." He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Nora stood as well, but instead of moving toward Eric, she stepped back. Just one small step, yet everyone noticed. That brief retreat was the end of his social standing. "You walked out," I continued. "You paid nothing, showed up never, and now you want money." The reporters were filming everything. Flashes popped. Eric flinched. His lawyer stood. "Mr. Lawson, this is inappropriate. What's truly wrong is trying to claim parental rights to a child you once called her problem, just so you can get access to his late mother's estate." The lawyer sat down. Eric looked around desperately. "I made mistakes, but Liam is my son. That's biology. That's fact." "No," I said, and I raised my hand toward the back of the room. The door opened. Liam walked in. He was small in his button-down shirt, the one I'd ironed that morning while my hands shook. 10 years old, dark hair like Francis, serious eyes that had seen too much grief already. He walked carefully between the rows of seats, his footsteps silent on the carpet until he reached me at the front of the chapel. Then he stopped and stood behind my left shoulder, slightly to the left, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him there, close enough that everyone in the room could see him clearly, close enough that Eric Dalton, standing frozen 15 feet away, couldn't possibly miss him. Eric stared, his mouth opened slightly, his carefully practiced composure cracked like ice under pressure. This was the first time he'd really looked at his son. Not a glance at the funeral, not a passing observation. This was Eric Dalton seeing the child he'd abandoned, standing alive and real and undeniable in front of 200 witnesses. Liam didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His presence was the statement. His existence was the evidence. 10 years of birthdays Eric had missed. 10 years of school plays and skinned knees and nightmares and questions about why other kids had fathers and he didn't. All of it standing behind me in a 10-year-old body wearing a button-down shirt. "That's Liam," I said quietly, my voice carrying through the absolute silence of the chapel. "Your son. The one you abandoned before he was born. The one you've never met. The one you called her problem." Eric's face had gone from white to gray. He looked like a man who'd been punched in the stomach and was still trying to remember how to breathe. Beside him, Nora had gone perfectly still, her expression frozen between horror and calculation. "He's real," I continued, and I felt Liam press slightly closer to my back, seeking shelter. "He's not a line item on a spreadsheet. He's not a complication you can walk away from. He's your son, and you threw him away." Eric's throat worked. He swallowed, tried to speak. I never meant. You said he was her problem." I cut him off. "We all just heard it. Your own voice, your own words. 10 years ago you called this child standing behind me a problem, and you walked away. Now you want to call yourself his father because there's money involved." The chapel was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the projector cooling down in the back. The TV cameras were rolling. The reporters had their phones up, recording everything. Every doctor, every nurse, every investor who'd known Francis was watching this moment. Watching Eric Dalton's carefully constructed narrative collapse in real time. Eric took a step forward, not aggressive, but desperate, like a drowning man reaching for something solid. His hand came up, reaching toward Liam, reaching toward the son he'd never held. Tom Vega moved. He didn't shove Eric. He didn't grab him. He simply placed one broad hand on Eric's chest and stopped him, completely, immovably. Tom was 66 years old, but he'd worked the factory floor for 30 years, and he was still strong as bedrock. His hand stayed flat against Eric's sternum, holding him in place. Eric stopped. He looked down at Tom's hand, then up at Tom's face, then past Tom to me and Liam. His eyes were wild now, panicked. The smooth confidence he'd walked in with was gone. This was a man watching everything slip away and having no idea how to stop it. "You don't get to touch him," I said, my voice steady and cold. "You don't get to stand next to him. You weren't there when Frances went into labor at 2 a.m. and called me because she had no one else. You weren't there when he was born, when he came out small and screaming and the nurses said he might need the NICU. You weren't there when he had pneumonia at age 4, and I stayed up 3 nights straight watching him breathe. You weren't there for one birthday, one Christmas, one Tuesday afternoon when he fell off his bike and needed stitches. You weren't there for one single moment of his life." My voice grew louder. I couldn't stop it. 10 years of watching Liam grow up without a father. 10 years of Frances pushing herself beyond her limits, alone. 10 years of this man living his comfortable life somewhere else, consequence-free, until there was money to claim. "You called him her problem," I said, and I pulled the folder from the table beside me. Inside was the document Frances had kept all these years, the waiver Eric had signed renouncing any involvement in her business ventures. She'd made him sign it back when they were still together, when he was pretending to be supportive, but she'd seen through him enough to protect herself. I held it up where the front row could see it. Eric's signature at the bottom, clear and undeniable. "Frances knew you'd come back," I said. "She knew that the moment she succeeded, the moment there was money involved, you'd appear. So she protected her son. She left me $29 million in trust for Liam's future. Not to him directly, where you could try to claim guardianship. Not in any way you could touch. She left it to me, with explicit instructions that you get nothing. Ever." Eric's lawyer, the thin man in the gray suit, stood up from his seat in the fourth row. "Mr. Lawson, this is highly inappropriate." "What's inappropriate?" I said, meeting his eyes. "Is your client trying to claim parental rights to a child he once called her problem, just so he can get access to that child's late mother's estate? What's inappropriate is threatening to take me to court for custody of a boy he's never met. What's inappropriate is him standing at my daughter's funeral, at her casket, demanding money." The lawyer sat back down, slowly. He looked at Eric with an expression I recognized. The look of a man realizing his client had lied to him about everything important. Eric's voice cracked when he finally spoke. "He's my son. That's biology, that's legal fact. I have rights." "You have nothing," I said, and the words came out like bullets. "You're a sperm donor. That's biology. But fatherhood? Fatherhood is showing up. Fatherhood is being there at 2 a.m. when your kid has a nightmare. Fatherhood is teaching him to tie his shoes and ride a bike and do his homework. Fatherhood is working 2 jobs if that's what it takes to keep food on the table. Fatherhood is sacrifice and presence and love. You did none of that. You have zero claim to the word." The room was absolutely silent except for my voice. Every person in that chapel was watching Eric, watching this man who'd walked in confident and entitled get stripped down to nothing in front of everyone who mattered. Eric's eyes were red now, his hands were shaking. He looked at Liam again, really looked at him, and I saw something break in his face. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was grief for everything he'd thrown away. Maybe it was just the realization that he'd lost. "I made mistakes," Eric said, and his voice was barely a whisper. "I was young. I was scared. I didn't know." "You weren't scared," I interrupted. "You were calculating. You decided my grandson wasn't worth your time. You decided Frances was a trap instead of a partner. You decided that being a father was an inconvenience. Those were choices, Eric, not mistakes. Choices." Nora stepped away from him then. It wasn't dramatic. She just shifted her weight, took one small step backward, put physical distance between herself and her husband. But everyone saw it. The woman who'd been playing the supportive wife, who'd been giving quotes to the press about Eric's good intentions, was abandoning him in real time. And everyone saw that too. Eric noticed. He glanced at Nora, saw her pulling away, and something in his face crumbled further. He was losing everything in this moment: his credibility, his reputation, his marriage, his last chance at claiming any relationship with his son. He lunged forward again, not violently but desperately, like a man grabbing for the last handhold on a cliff. He tried to move past Tom, tried to reach Liam, tried to get close enough to touch him, to say something directly to the boy, to salvage even a scrap of connection. Tom's hand didn't move, just held him there, immovable. "Please," Eric said. And now he was talking directly to Liam, his voice breaking. "I know I wasn't there. I know I should have been. But I want to try now. I want to be part of your life. You're my son." "No," Liam said. It was the first word he'd spoken since walking into the room. Quiet, but clear. Absolute. "No," he said again. "You're not my dad. Papa is my dad." And he pressed closer against my back, away from Eric, making his choice clear to everyone watching. Eric's expression fell apart. He looked like someone seeing his final bit of hope slip away. I looked at him. At this man who'd destroyed my daughter, who'd thrown away his son, who'd spent 10 years living without consequences, and then showed up demanding money at a funeral. "You're looking at him for the first time right now," I said quietly. and my voice was steady again. Calm, in control. This is the only time you'll ever see him this close. Take a good look, Eric. Memorize it, because it's all you'll ever get. Eric's eyes were streaming now, not theatrical crying, not performance, real tears, real grief for everything he'd lost, everything he'd thrown away, everything he could never have back. That's all you'll ever get, I repeated. Then I put my hand on Liam's shoulder, gentle and protective, and we turned our backs on Eric Dalton. We walked down the center aisle of that chapel together, past 200 witnesses, past the cameras and the reporters and the doctors and the investors, past everyone who'd seen Eric exposed for exactly what he was. Behind us, I heard Eric make a sound, not words, just a broken sound of a man who'd lost everything. We walked out into the sunlight. The door closed behind us, and we left Eric Dalton standing alone in that chapel, stripped of money, credibility, marriage, and the one word he'd thought would save him, father. He had nothing left, and we had everything that mattered. By Sunday morning, every news outlet in the city had picked up the story. The headlines were brutal. Father exposed at memorial service. Recording reveals decade-old abandonment. Man demands estate after calling child her problem. Eric's face was everywhere, but the narrative had flipped completely. He wasn't the sympathetic, estranged father anymore. He was the villain. The Gazette ran a full feature on page 3 with the most damning headline, Dalton's own words condemn him at ex-partner's memorial. They'd obtained footage from one of the TV cameras at the service. The article included screenshots of Eric's face when his recorded voice played, when Liam walked in, when Tom stopped him from approaching the boy. Every moment of his humiliation, documented and distributed. The local TV stations ran the story as their lead for 3 nights straight. They played the audio clip repeatedly, Eric's drunk voice saying, "The kid is her problem," over and over. They interviewed some of the doctors and nurses who'd been at the memorial, who talked about Frances's dedication and Eric's conspicuous absence from her life. One nurse, a woman named Patricia, who'd worked with Frances for 6 years, gave a quote that went viral. Frances Lawson built something extraordinary while raising a child alone. Eric Dalton did nothing but show up when there was money to take. That tells you everything about both of them. By Monday morning, Eric's petition for parental rights was withdrawn. His lawyer released a brief, carefully worded statement to the press. After careful consideration and consultation with his family, Mr. Dalton has decided not to pursue custody arrangements or financial claims at this time. He respects the wishes of the late Ms. Lawson and asks for privacy during this difficult period. Translation: they knew they'd lost. They knew that after the memorial service, after the audio recording, after Eric's own words condemned him in front of 200 witnesses and multiple cameras, no judge would side with him. They were cutting their losses. Keegan called me that afternoon. "It's over," she said. "Eric's lawyer just filed withdrawal papers. No custody claim, no estate claim. He's done." What changed his mind? Reality. He watched his entire case disintegrate in front of witnesses who matter. Doctors, investors, hospital board members. These are people with influence, people who sit on nonprofit boards and make donations and have the ears of judges. After Saturday, Eric has no credibility with any of them. His lawyer knew that trying to push forward would be professional suicide. What about the press coverage? That sealed it. Eric's face is now permanently associated with the phrase, abandoned his pregnant partner. His business connections are evaporating. His social standing is gone. He's toxic, Henry. Completely toxic. I felt something relax in my chest, tension I'd been carrying for weeks, finally releasing. So it's really over? It's really over. Liam is safe. The money is safe. Eric Dalton has no legal avenue left to pursue. I thanked her and hung up. Sat at my kitchen table in silence for a long time, letting it sink in. We'd won. Not just legally, but completely. Eric wasn't just defeated, he was destroyed. The social consequences came quickly. Nora filed for divorce 3 weeks after the memorial service. The announcement was brief, released through her lawyer with no comment. But Giselle, who still had connections in journalism, heard the real story. Nora had been blindsided by the audio recording. Eric had told her he'd lost touch with Frances during a difficult time, that he'd tried to be involved but Frances had shut him out. The recording proved he'd lied. Nora, whose entire life was built on image and reputation, couldn't be married to a man who'd been exposed as someone who abandoned his pregnant partner and called his own child a problem. The divorce settlement gave Nora the house and most of their liquid assets. Eric kept his failing supplement company and his reputation in tatters. The supplement company collapsed within 6 weeks. Health First Wellness, Eric's so-called high-end wellness venture, had been running on investments from wealthy clients who wanted to be connected to success. But after the memorial service and the media coverage, those investors backed out. No one wanted their name or money associated with a man who had abandoned his child and tried to take from a woman's estate after her passing. By late November, the company announced it was restructuring, which everyone understood as closing down. Eric's business partner, a former colleague from his medical supply days, released a statement to distance himself. Mr. Dalton's personal matters have made it impossible for us to maintain productive business relationships. Even that was coded language. What he truly meant was that no one wanted to work with Eric Dalton anymore. Through her network of contacts, Giselle kept track of Eric's whereabouts. By January, 6 months after Frances's passing, he had left the state. He relocated to Phoenix, Arizona, where he took a regional sales job at a small pharmaceutical distributor. It wasn't impressive or high profile, just a regular position, the same kind of work he'd done before meeting Frances. He'd gone from entrepreneur with a beautiful wife and social connections to divorced, disgraced, and selling pills in the desert. From someone who mattered to someone no one remembered. He's invisible now, Giselle told me over coffee one Saturday afternoon. I checked with some contacts in Phoenix. He's living in a rental apartment, drives a 10-year-old sedan, keeps to himself, no social life, no networking events. He goes to work and goes home. Good, I said. You really don't feel any guilt about destroying him? I thought about Frances, about watching her work herself to exhaustion for 10 years while Eric lived his comfortable life, about holding Liam in the hospital the night he was born, knowing his father had chosen to be absent, about Eric showing up at Frances's funeral with that practiced smile, ready to claim money he'd never earned. No, I said. I don't feel guilty at all. Liam asked me about Eric one time, about a month after the memorial service. We were in my kitchen and I was making spaghetti, his favorite meal. He'd been quiet during dinner, pushing meatballs around his plate. Papa, he said finally. That man at the service, the one everyone was upset with. That was my biological father, right? I turned off the stove and sat down across from him at the table. Yes. And he left my mom before I was born? Yes. Because he didn't want to be a dad? Because he didn't want the responsibility. He saw you and your mom as an inconvenience instead of a family. Liam nodded slowly, processing. Mom told me once that you were the one who mattered. She said biology doesn't make someone family. Being there makes someone family. She was right. So you're my real dad, not him. If you want to call me that, yes, I'd be honored. I do want to call you that, Liam said. Is that okay? I felt my throat tighten. That's more than okay. Good, because that's what you are. He went back to eating. The matter settled in his mind with the simple certainty of childhood. I watched him eat spaghetti and thought about everything we'd been through, everything Frances had built and sacrificed, everything Eric had tried to take. And I thought about victory. Frances's $29 million sat in trust, managed carefully by Keegan and a financial advisor. It would pay for Liam's education, his future, his security. College, medical school if he wanted it. A house someday. Investments that would set him up for life. Everything Eric had tried to claim would instead build the life of the son he'd thrown away. There was a perfect justice in that. A symmetry that Francis would have appreciated. Eric Dalton had abandoned his son and his partner, lived 10 years without consequences, then showed up demanding money at a funeral. Now he had nothing. No son, no wife, no business, no reputation, no future in the city where he'd thought he mattered. And we had everything. Liam was safe. The money was secure. Eric would never be able to claim any relationship with his biological son, would never be able to stand next to him and call himself a father. That was revenge. Not physical harm, and not unlawful. It was simply the truth, revealed at precisely the right moment, before the right witnesses, and bringing the fitting consequences. Francis would have liked that. 3 years later, I'm 73. Liam is 13 now, tall, thoughtful, and brilliant, just like his mother. He wants to design medical equipment to help others. We never talk about Eric anymore. That chapter ended at the memorial service, the day Liam chose to stand with me instead of him. Sometimes at night I remember it. Eric hearing his own words turn against him, the crowd's reaction, Nora stepping back, the cameras flashing, and us walking away while he remained behind, finished. His business failed, his marriage ended, and he eventually moved to Arizona, forgotten. People say that holding someone accountable doesn't change anything. They're wrong. It isn't about comfort, it's about consequences. Eric walked away from Francis and Liam, then came back after she was gone, trying to claim what she had built. He believed that being a father was something he could simply reclaim. I showed him it wasn't. With nothing but truth, patience, and timing, I dismantled his reputation, his lies, and his illusion of control. Francis would have been proud. She protected Liam all her life. I protected him after. I kept her promise. Eric would never touch her son. Now Liam has everything: love, security, a future. Eric has nothing but regret. Late at night, Liam comes downstairs. "You okay, Papa?" "I'm fine," I say. "Just thinking about your mom, about you." "I'm the lucky one," he says. After he goes back to bed, I think of how far we've come. Tomorrow we'll have breakfast, review for his math test, live our quiet, ordinary life. But before I sleep, I remember Eric's face when he realized he'd lost forever, that fatherhood is earned, not claimed. Francis won, Liam won, I won. Justice came late, but it came perfectly.